Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our webinar titled The New Property Maintenance Operative Apprenticeship Standards. Thank you for joining us. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to explain a few things about our webinar platform to allow you to get the most out of the experience. All viewers will be in listen-only mode. However, to engage with the webinar, please use the on-screen panel. You can also adjust your audio settings using the tabs on this panel. Feel free to use the question tab to engage with us during the webinar. We expect that our webinar will be extremely popular, but our team will do their best to answer your questions at the end. During our webinar, we will also be running a number of polls. To record your response, please click on the on-screen voting button when asked to do so. After the webinar, we will be providing a recording, a copy of the slides, and a Q&A to address any unanswered questions. Now I'd like to hand over to our presenters, Rob Malinder and David Pye, Technical Advisors, and Salim Bitteram, Industry Manager.
Thank you very much, Drew. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Pye, and I'll take you through the first few slides. So, first of all, the content. Today we'll be discussing the overview of the apprenticeship reforms. So, just a brief overview of the reforms that have already taken place with many of these standards. We'll then move on to the structure and the content of this particular standard, then how we can support you to prepare for the delivery and the endpoint assessment associated with this property maintenance standard. Next steps. So once you've listened to the webinar, if you want to take and progress this qualification standard further, we'll discuss the best ways that you can do that. Then hopefully we'll answer all of your questions and queries. So, an overview of the apprenticeship reforms. You've probably heard and listened to a few webinars and presentations in the past where we've covered these, so it's probably quite familiar to you. But just as a recap and add to the context of this webinar, we'll just cover briefly this again. So, the first point there, the apprenticeship reforms and the new trailblazers were to help give employers control of designing these apprenticeships. And you'll be able to see that as part of this process where the employers have been heavily involved in creating the standard, creating the assessment plan, and then supporting and working with us to create the qualification to underpin this apprenticeship. Secondly, it's there to increase the flexibility of delivery, designed to those employer needs, simplify the funding system, and increase the effectiveness of that program and that training because it will meet those employer needs much more closely. If you'd like a summary of the main changes between the new apprenticeship standards and the SAGE frameworks, we have a link there at the bottom with a really useful 25-minute recording session. So now for the first poll.
So you'll see a poll flash up on your screen shortly. If you could choose an answer when you see him. Just launch that now, so please choose any of the following items from the list. Okay, I'm just going to close that and share that with you now. As you can see, 68%, majority construction, followed closely by building services and engineering.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's really interesting. We'll be, just handing over to clear the screen of that poll now, so we're back onto the presentation. Yeah, that's really helpful for us. I think when we see the sectors that you're from, it helps us understand better where you're coming from and how you may deliver this new standard. So the actual property maintenance standard and the qualification we've produced to support your delivery of this standard. So it's a 9673. So it's newly created as part of this apprenticeship standard. There's a small snip there from our website showing the materials that have already been produced, already available, already there for centres to run should you wish to progress this qualification and standard back at your centres. The qualification itself was developed by working closely with those employers, so it is based on those employer needs. And some of the feedback that we've had already when sharing the qualification and the details of the assessments with providers and employers is how closely this meets those needs for this maintenance sector. So who's the qualification for? And the Level 2 Diploma Property Maintenance is designed for people primarily who work in that maintenance sector. So beforehand, many people working in facilities and carrying out maintenance on buildings and structures such as schools, office blocks, hospitals and so on, they would have facilities management, and they would employ a variety of staff, some skilled, some unskilled labourers carry out general maintenance. To my knowledge, this is the first qualification and standard that truly meets that need of maintenance in those buildings and structures that I've previously mentioned. So what does a qualification cover? It covers a variety of general maintenance tasks, from general hanging of doors, fixing leaks, checking for faults, and basic maintenance tasks associated with those buildings. There's opportunities to progress from that into a specific sector, so maybe plumbing, electrical, building, construction, or progress into facilities management. So who did we develop the qualification with? There's a number of employers. We've named a couple there: Mighty, Carillion, Interserve. So these were many of the employers who were creating this standard and apprenticeship. And it's part of an apprenticeship standard which you can deliver at your centres. So the funding. So obviously it's very interesting when you're looking to deliver this qualification and standard to look at the funding bands associated with these new standards. And this is the one for property maintenance, as you can see on the screen now. So it's part of Band 9, which is worth £9,000. There are some incentive payments associated with the age of the candidate that you may recruit. So you could have an uplift of £1,000 for yourself and the employer. So there's a maximum total of funding for you as a provider of £10,000. So the qualification, how would that look? So full approval through a QAP is required if you want to run this qualification, because it's a brand new standard, brand new qualification. It has to follow a full QAP approval. There are two options with this qualification. You can register on the 967311, which is a full apprenticeship package. Includes the on-programme and the EPA, or simply the 967312, which is the EPA only package. So the 1.1 version consists of a qualification certificate, the on-programme and the endpoint assessment, where the 967312 consists of only the endpoint assessment. So we'll discuss those a little bit further on in the slideshow, and we'll go into more detail. Okay, I'll pass you over to my colleague Rob, who'll discuss the qualification in more detail.
Okay, as we can see from the previous slide, the on-programme offer before the gateway is a logbook, portfolio evidence, and research assignment. The candidate would then go through the gateway to endpoint assessment. Endpoint assessment is a requirement for all apprenticeship standards moving forward. So we're going to now run through the content of the qualification, the on-programme offer, and the endpoint assessment. Just a reminder, you have got a questions tab on your screen. This can be sometimes complex to get across. Any questions, please feel free to drop them in the box at any time, and we'll try and answer them as we move forward. So the qualification is live. All the material is on the website for the on-programme offer and the support for endpoint assessment. This is just a snip from the website, which again shows you the structure and where the material is. So if you want to look at any of our assessment material, you just go to the 9673 website, put that in the search box, 9673, and it'll take you to all our documentation. Anything to do with assessment material is in the drop-down box there at the top for assessment. Anything to do with delivery, so your course handbook, is in the Centre Documents tab. So all your support material around endpoint assessment, gateway, research assignments, logbooks are all in assessment, and the course handbook, which tells you what you've got to teach almost, the structure of delivery, is in Centre Documents. So the structure of the qualification. So as David said, this qualification has been developed, although not mandatory, it's been developed to support the standard and to meet the requirements of the standard, and it's been agreed and accepted by the employer group. So obviously, as a delivery of apprenticeship, you've got to meet that 20% off the job training. This is an excellent vehicle to do that. At 426 guided learning hours, it's a great way of documenting the evidence of how you as an organisation have achieved that 20% off the job training. Now, because 426 and a 12-month apprenticeship, that's well within the remit of the 20% off the job. So as I say, a great tool to do that and log that for audit purposes. So there's 12 mandatory units and 2 elective units. There'll be no extra funding for the elective units. They are there if your customers require them, but it'll be up to you to manage those as required. The mandatory units are health and safety, customer service, and then we've got more the industry units. So there's painting and tiling tasks, carrying out and planning, preventive property maintenance, a plumbing unit, electrical testing and repairs, understanding and maintaining heating and ventilation equipment and refrigeration equipment. Very low level, we've got to say this. You know, this is a maintenance man. We're not talking about training plumbers, electricians, heat and vent people here. It is the people who probably isolate the component, stop any accidents happening, and maybe contact the relevant trade person. So we've also got 209, internal, external building fabric maintenance, control of property maintenance and related resources, and working with external contractors. So there's various tasks. When you look in this course handbook, there's various tasks the maintenance person would carry out and has to be trained to be able to complete, but it is a very practical oriented qualification. The knowledge is almost the knowledge behind the person being able to do the practical task. And when you look at what's required for the on-programme with regards to assessment on the left-hand side, it does relate to that. So there's no in-centre practical assessment. You would obviously have to train within the centre to the course handbook requirements and to enable them to carry out these tasks actually on site. So for on-programme evidence, the candidate has to complete 2 research assignments, already there on the website for you to have a look at, which is more around sustainability within the organisation, how it's structured, how they carry out property maintenance. And then they have to complete a logbook, a portfolio of evidence, we've called it there, which is also, again, supported on the City and Guilds website. Very structured, where the candidate has to fill in almost job sheets related to certain tasks out there on site and get them verified by a witness. So all your documentation is there, ready for your own on-programme delivery and good to go. All logbooks have been created and are readily accessible. Once that's been completed and Maths and English have been completed, we go through to endpoint assessment, which comprises of knowledge test and practical assessment. We're going to go into that into more detail in future slides. So the assessment gateway, there's a declaration form, and the copy of it is there on the right. So the candidate has to complete this along with the assessment organisation and the employer to verify that they are happy that the candidate goes through to endpoint assessment. So once they have completed a pass against the 2 research assignments, the logbook's been completed on site, which incorporates the behaviours within it, and then the Maths and English have been completed, all parties complete the declaration form, and that's then submitted when endpoint assessment is booked. So centre requirements and support. So although this is under centre requirements, it's almost an employer requirement, but obviously it would be the centre delivering who would have to liaise with the employer, so we've put detail of it in there. So the logbook, the on-site portfolio, which we complete on-site, has to be verified by an expert witness who is occupationally competent. So this is an employer representative. So the expert witness is used in the assessment process to verify that the candidate has done certain jobs on site. So it's almost putting the onus back onto the employer to say they are validating the candidate can do appropriate tasks out there in industry to an appropriate level. So it's not necessary for the expert witness to be an assessor, but they have to be industry competent, and they're the person on site who's saying, The candidate's got current knowledge and experience and can do these tasks appropriately. So with regards to in-centre assessment and actually assessing then that on-site logbook, this has to be a competent assessor who holds the relevant level 3 certificate in assessing or equivalent, as it says there in the top left paragraph. Assessors must also be occupationally competent and hold a relevant MVQ in one or more of the relevant trade areas. So, for instance, could be a plumbing assessor with relevant CPD in the other areas, are occupationally competent, it says they're relevant with 3 years experience, relevant CPD in, so if you're a plumber, maybe relevant CPD in the other trade areas, so plumbing, painting, tiling, to the appropriate level, nothing too in-depth, and hold the assessor's qualification, they'd then be able to deliver. IQA processes and practices are required for the on-programme qualification. This is delivered differently in endpoint assessment and quality assured separately, but because this is a City and Guilds qualification, you will still require internal quality assurance and external quality assurance before the qualification is completed. Assessment detail. So we've run through the standard slightly. I'm going to go through almost the route from start to finish for a candidate on this flow chart. So once the centre has registered the candidate on the Property Maintenance 9673, this registers them for the on-programme element and endpoint assessment. So as we can say there under the on-programme box, as part of on-programme they have to complete logbook, on-site, research assignment. They're graded pass-fail for the logbook and pass distinction fail for the research assignment. None of those grades contribute to endpoint assessment. They are simply to complete the on-programme offer. So once the candidate has gone to that stage, they've completed the logbook on site, they've completed both research assignments for 201, 210, Maths and English are then verified complete, they can then go through the gateway. So that gateway is almost, the on-programme is complete, qualification is not complete because the endpoint assessment is part of that, but on-programme assessment is complete, the candidate is now moving forward into endpoint assessment. So endpoint assessment is separated into 3 parts. We've got a synoptic knowledge assessment. This is a 60-question multiple choice test which appears on Evolve, 90 minutes duration. It's expected the candidate would complete this first before completing the next section, which is synoptic practical assessment. The synoptic practical assessment we're going to look into in more detail, but it's basically a day in a bay, where they'll carry out various maintenance tasks, practical tasks, and then the next section in that, as you can see, is an interview afterwards, which questions them on those tasks, how they've isolated things, how they've done various tasks, how they've prepared themselves, and they then are graded pass, distinction, fail. So the EPA is then graded separately. We have to achieve the apprenticeship, and the apprenticeship must achieve a pass against all assessment components within the endpoint assessment. To achieve a pass, they have to achieve a distinction in endpoint assessment to achieve a distinction. So the practical assessment bay, the basic layout is there on the slides, and you can see from it they're doing various painting, tiling, plumbing tasks, isolating circuits which aren't working. There's a bit of pat testing in there. When you look into the centre requirements for endpoint assessment, it tells you totally in there how to set up the bay, how the assessments will be delivered, what the specs for all the assessments are. This is just giving you a basic overview on one slide. There's far more detail in those documents, and when we give you the contact details for the digital sales team later, any more information we can pass on to you from that, we can forward after today's event. So there's just a plan view of the bay. It's just 3 walls. You've basically got, on the left, you've got an electrical wall, then you've got a building fabric wall in the middle where they do all the painting, tiling, plastering, patching, etc. And then you've got a plumbing wall there on the right. There's also a mock door there they might have to rehang, and a lock they might have to change there for some of the carpentry tasks, skirting, architraves, that type of tasks. It is very low level. It's a maintenance man, woman. So that's one of the key areas within the bay, and any more details on that can be followed up afterwards.
Thanks, Rob. So the next few slides are going to be around how we can support you as an organisation, prepare for delivery for on-programme as well as endpoint assessment. So we've got a number of resources to actually aid and help you and take you through the process for on-programme. For all of our qualifications, including property maintenance. We carry out a number of webinars throughout the year. These are based around funding reforms, the new technical reforms that are currently going in place at the moment, as well as a number of apprenticeship reforms, obviously property maintenance being one of those today. We also carry out a consultancy service through Advance, which is an outcome-focused consultancy done through training and implementation. We've also got a number of dedicated technical advisors as well in a number of our areas, building services, construction, facilities management. So these advisors have got technical expertise in a number of the subsectors we actually deal with. We also carry out a number of CPD events throughout the course of the year as well to help and aid assessors, tutors, heads of department, just to ensure that they are up to date with a number of the changes that are going on within the sectors. We also have our own e-portfolio system through Learning Assistant. So we do have a number of resources to help you and aid you through a number of the changes. So the approval process, because it's a brand new standard and it hasn't actually replaced an existing apprenticeship on the SAYS framework, this will require all centres to go through the full approval process, details of which can be found again on our website. There is also a centre guidance for 9673 on endpoint assessment, which is again available on the 9673 webpage. Again, as previously Rob was mentioning, if you are planning to deliver these qualifications, staff must be able to demonstrate that they have the relevant occupational expertise required. So endpoint reservation, what is the process and how do centres begin to deliver endpoint assessment and how is that reservation taking place? So centres would register their learners either on the on-programme programme of study, including the EPA, or on the EPA only. They then would make a reservation for booking prior to the endpoint assessment taking place. That would be 90 days. A fee would be charged for that, and then a date would then be sent, provided by the employer. The endpoint assessment organisation and the ESFA data would be captured, and this would be issued, provided to the employer. The employer then submits to the EPA and ESFA data, and the gateway declarations are done through City and Guilds. In terms of the programs of study and our price points for this particular apprenticeship, we've got 2 effective programs of study. We've got the 967311, which candidates will be automatically enrolled for the on-programme element, as well as the endpoint assessment element. So one programme of study would enable the learner to carry out the on-programme as well as the endpoint assessment. When the on-programme component has been completed and the gateway declaration form has been signed and agreed, the centre will then be able to book the endpoint practical assessment using the 9673-501 component. On registering for 9673, the centre will be charged for £155 for the on programme. Once that's been completed, they can then book the endpoint assessment component. A fee of £600 will then be charged. For booking endpoint assessment only, candidates registered on this pathway will only be registered for endpoint assessment. They will be registered on the Level 2 Diploma in Property Maintenance endpoint assessment only. Fees for this is 9673.12, and that is a £100 reservation cost. The centre will then be charged £600 once the candidate is entered for the practical element and a date being agreed. That is the 9673-501 component. After successful completion, the grades are agreed. The provider and the employer receive the City and Guilds endpoint assessment certificate. The endpoint assessment and the ESFA data form will then be uploaded. And finally, an issue certificate will be handed out to the employer. This last slide just highlights how centres and tutors can actually become a independent endpoint assessor. So this particular link is on the web page. The PowerPoint presentation will be handed out to all of the candidates, all of the delegates that are registered for this particular webinar, and all the links will be on there as well.
Okay, and we have one final poll question for you. You'll see it flash up on your screen shortly. And this question is, would you consider running Property Maintenance Operative? Okay, I'm just going to put the results up on your screen, and we can see that a resounding 78% of you said yes, you would consider it. It's brilliant news.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just take you through the last few slides. We've already seen there's some questions come up, so we've made a note of those. We will answer all of those after these final slides. So next steps, how can we support you as we move forward? So we have a consultancy arm of City and Guilds, and we can support you with all your apprenticeship needs. We can do an audit of your current apprenticeship strategy. We can help define your apprenticeship offer, and we can help upskill your team. If this is something you're interested in, there is a consultancy service link at the bottom of this slide, and we share this with you afterwards if you follow that for further information. Okay, support and resources available. A lot of our workshops, a lot of our webinars have been recorded, so again there's another link there. If there's some previous webinars that you're interested in hearing about, you can follow that link and watch and listen to those. If you're interested in the consultancy part of our organisation, there's several links that will give you further information, and some really useful links at the bottom of that slide on the government information around funding rules, technical funding guidance, and apprenticeship standards. So a lot of support links to support you with further information after this webinar. Our contact details, if you've got technical queries or you'd like to follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn, we've got our hyperlinks and all our direct emails on that slide. So, a recap into why City and Guilds.
Okay, so why City and Guilds? We've got an on-programme offer which supports you through to the 20% off-the-job training. So, you know, we didn't have to produce that. You've got a standard there. You've got to meet. This is a tool for delivery. We've got support material, we've got the logbook, we've got the assignment. It's all developed for you. You've nothing to prepare. Everything's ready on our website, which has been approved by the employer group, which I think is really important. You know, City and Guilds hasn't just run off and developed this on themselves. We've had support and liaised with the employer group along that journey. The logbook is structured and easy to follow. It's literally the candidate filling in job sheets as they're doing the maintenance tasks at work and having those assessed. Once they've had those assessed, completed the structured assignments, that then gets them through to the gateway stage. The research assignments have been written with the employers as a tool required to measure those units. And then there's a course handbook for delivery, so you can plan delivery and outline areas of training required for the candidate. That might be very varied. You could have some adults, etc., who might have relevant experience. So training could be varied dependent on candidate initial assessment. We've then got the EPA offer. Obviously the EPA, the endpoint assessment, has to be independent. So we've got a structured endpoint assessment service we are now carrying out, where we would send that assessor into the centre to assess the candidate in that bay we looked at earlier. So the knowledge test, the practical assessment is live, is good to go. We've got sample questions on the website to help candidates prepare for that. We've got the practical assessment, the bay, the structure of the bay, how that's delivered is all there in the centre guide for you to start and kick things off. Tells you how things are run, how the assessment's going to be delivered, how we ensure it's independent, etc. We quality assure the gateway. So anybody just coming through to endpoint assessment who doesn't want to use 9673 as the on program, we can also provide a service to quality assure that gateway. We won't be just letting anybody sign up for endpoint assessment only unless they've met the requirements of that gateway. So there's a detailed spec and delivery planner for centres who want to run EPA. All the bay requirements are all set up in there, how the delivery has to be taken place, what's independence, etc. So we can't run through all that today in the webinar, but what we'll do is when we show you the contact details later, if anybody's looking to set up, it's good to go. All your guidance is there for delivery. We're good to go with regards endpoint assessment. At the moment, we've got 7 endpoint assessors trained up, ready and waiting to carry out assessments. We've got lead assessors who are going to carry out quality assurance in that endpoint assessment service. We've got a dedicated endpoint assessment team who can support with bookings, etc. So that process is already working for other trade areas. So we're not just trying this out with them, with property maintenance. We're already structured and delivering endpoint assessment. The endpoint assessments are competent, they've been trained up, and they all hold the relevant trade skills and expertise to ensure that the employers are getting quality trained staff out of this endpoint assessment. I think that's crucial. What we're doing here is the trade test at the end, so we're validating for that employer that that person is a quality candidate. So anybody wanting any more information on delivering this standard? So we had a good response to the poll there. Digital sales at cityandguilds.com. Please fire off to that directly and we'll get support out to you as a centre. So if you want to start the ball rolling with approval or you just want any more information, contact digital sales at cityandguilds.com. Sorry, direct sales at cityandguilds.com. Keep up to date though, register for the email updates with us. We've got that link there for email updates. That's how we get across information with any changes to assessment, etc. If you want to be involved in developments of new qualifications, we've got a link there for business skills. Or any information specifically around endpoint assessment, not necessarily property maintenance, you can also contact the endpoint assessment email there as well. But for future, if you want to deliver, I would suggest direct sales at City and Guilds would be the first point of contact. We're going to pause for a moment to give us a chance to review some of the questions which have been asked already and to give you the chance to then collate your thoughts and type any future questions in the questions box provided. Okay, thanks a lot. Sorry to keep you waiting. There are a lot of questions coming through. We're going to work through some, but please feel free to ask any questions as we move forward. One of the questions we've had is, have we got 10 mandatory units? Is the 2 missing? It's perhaps not clear from the slide, and it's a snip from the handbook actually. 2 of the units are covered by the research assignment, and then there's 10 mandatory units covered by the logbook. So on the slide there it says unit 250, sorry, research assignment 250. That covers unit 201 and 210. So apologies, I think I did say 10 mandatory units. It's actually 12 mandatory units, 2 covered by the research assignment, 10 covered by the logbook. We've had another question about approval. Looking to start delivery, what about start dates? How long will approval take? It is a full approval process. That must be completed before any candidates can be registered. The approval process can be completed quite quickly, literally as soon as we can get an EQA allocated to you as a centre. If you're already a City and Guild centre, we can get out there, we can get your approval done, and we can get you registering candidates as soon as possible.
Thanks, Rob. Just another one mentioning about 2 research assignments on the on-programme, but the standard says 1 short research assignment. I've just opened it up actually, and it's really 1 assignment with 2 tasks. So it's 2 tasks really, 1 assignment. We just split it to 2 tasks to make it a little bit easier to administer and for the candidate possibly to work through.
Okay, we've got another one about endpoint assessment. My understanding was EPA has to be entirely independent to on-programme. So, do you have units to complete in the EPA? Basically, no, there's no separate units in endpoint assessment to complete. Endpoint assessment tests whole job competence. So the knowledge assessment, the spec for that is in the handbook, and it covers various aspects of the on-programme delivery. So literally parts of the qualification is assessed. Same for the practical, there's various practical tasks which are assessed in that endpoint assessment. So the centre sets up that bay we showed you on the slide. The bay is set up within the centre to our specification, and then we send in our endpoint assessor as the endpoint assessment service. We send in that assessor who will carry out the endpoint assessment. So that's how we get around the independence. It's our endpoint assessor who's assessing that candidate. That's set up on a 4-to-1 ratio, maximum of 4-to-1 ratio. So on the assessment day, you've got 4 assessment bays in there, 4 candidates, and the assessor will be rotating themselves around the candidates, carrying out the practical assessment before they complete the interview at the end of the day. But all that's explained in the centre guidance for endpoint assessment.
Thanks, Rob. The next one around internal quality assurance. What qualifications does the IQA need? It will be the same as the assessor, but in addition, and this is explained in the handbook and on the presentation around the IQA level 4 qualification. So it's very similar to what you'd expect with most qualifications. It's the same as we use and apply to IQAs across a spectrum of qualifications.
We've had another one on who is the endpoint assessment organisation. Is it City and Guilds? Yes, we're set up and good to go as the endpoint assessment organisation, and then we will be providing that assessment service and the assessor.
Ali, is slides available to read after the webinar? Yes, we'll make these available to all the delegates following this webinar. Can you EPA, sorry Rob, can you EPA your own learners within the centre? The endpoint assessment needs to be independent, and we will be employing the qualified assessors and sending them out as part of that EPA process.
Question on English and Maths. Does the candidate have to hold Maths and English at level 1 and level 2, one or the other? It's a bit of a bizarre one. Apologies, I should have mentioned this perhaps during the slide, or we should have. They have to complete level 1 Maths and English and attempt or sit the assessment at level 2. Perhaps not something we generally agree with. Obviously, we could be setting candidates up to fail in some instances there if they're not going to complete at that level, but that's stated in the assessment plan. And it's from the Institute of Apprenticeships. The minimum is level 1, but this employer group has decided they want them to attempt level 2 to try and achieve level 2. So that's the requirements to get through the gateway.
Question on the direct observations as part of the logbook. They're associated with the health and safety and customer care units, And in the logbook, you'll see a checklist of the direct observations. So the employers didn't want reams and reams of paperwork against those direct observations. They wanted the qualified assessor to go out and observe that. It would be good practice, though, as part of observing those minimum requirements, to carry out direct observation of another maintenance activity, which will then reduce the amount of evidence that the candidate will have to provide to meet all the requirements of the qualification. So yeah, the 2 direct observations are predetermined against the health and safety and customer care units.
So does the training provider become the EPA service? To be fair, anybody could set up as an endpoint assessment service. They might not just be City and Guilds, but City and Guilds are endpoint assessment service for this program. So anybody completing 9673 will have to use City and Guilds.
Next one, what are the time scales for endpoint assessments? It is a 90-day. We look for 90 days on the booking, and then we agree a time and a date with the centre. Another question about 12 months and a day. Can they complete the EPA and be certified? Yes, the minimum duration of this apprenticeship is 12 months.
How are employees assessed as competent? Well, that's up to the sign-up process, really, for the centre. They've got to ensure you'll get obviously you've got access to the logbook and you've got access to the course handbook, so you can see the range of work the candidate needs to be able to complete, and it's up to the employer to verify they can access that range of work to be able to get the apprentice through the programme.
Okay, there's a question about assessors. So there's a number of someone's asking a question about training, CPD requirements for assessors. I'd just probably signpost you again to the handbook to see the requirements of the assessors, and if you feel as though there are skills gaps, you have to identify what those are and maybe put on your own training, access a few short CPD courses, and look to improve the demonstrating skills of that assessor so they can carry out that activity.
So is it realistic to get a 16-year-old to Gateway within 12 months? Well, this is a minimum. That's up to your centre's initial assessment, and 12 months is the minimum. If it is a 16-year-old learner, this could be a longer than 12-month programme. You get £9,000, 12 months to delivery. Up to you as a centre, you could deliver over 24 months if required.
Rob, the on programme basically supports that whole process to ensure that by the time they get to that gateway and on successful completion of the on programme, they will be ready to go through to the endpoint assessment.
As an approved centre for BSc, will it be our current EQA? It could be, and you could perhaps request that with the regional office if you've got a good relationship. All EQAs will have one trade competence. Let's say if it's building services or construction, they will have to have that one trade competence, that level of expertise, so they will be able to carry out EQA for property maintenance. So that could be a possibility.
Question about the passwords for the EPA document. All the passwords are on the walled garden. You need to remember when you do a search on 9673 on the walled garden, it will bring up the range of options for registration. If you click on the 11, the main route, it'll then give you all the passwords. So some people have been missing it. You may have tried to access it. So just remember to click on that extra link. Someone asking about can they hire their own assessor for EPA? No, to be independent, it needs to come from the endpoint assessment provider, which will be ourselves. We're nearly up on time, so we're just trying to answer the last couple of questions. There's only a couple more to go.
Does the qualification cover the on programme and EPA? Yes, the EPA has been written into the standard, and this part in this one is quite a strange one, but is part of the on programme. So the EPA is actually part of the qualification.
A question around do the learners have to achieve the level 2 functional skills to go through the gateway? No, as Rob said before, they need to achieve the level 1. They just need to attempt level 2. They need to demonstrate that we've tried to stretch and challenge them and improve their skills on functional skills. So they need to take the test.
Okay, well, we are about up for time. We are mindful to try and keep these activities to time. We understand there could be questions we may have not had a chance to answer, or there could be any future questions. Please contact direct sales at City and Guilds with that email address. For any more documentation you need access to, support to develop your business and to start deliver this, we'll be able to put you in contact with the right person. Thank you very much for your attendance today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Bye.